Well, the federal poverty measure as it stands now, the formula that they use now, was developed in 1959, was originally first applied in the 60s, and it was built under the assumption that about 29%, 30% of your budget was spent on food. And so, and then it's a little more complicated than this, but basically you take the amount that food costs that a year and you multiply it by 3, and that's the federal poverty level. Well, as you and I know, even if you shopped at Whole Foods every single day of the year, you're not going to spend a third of your budget these days on food. Really, we're spending it on housing. We're spending it currently on gas, because gas is so high. We're spending it on health insurance, if you have it, and childcare. So really, it's really housing, childcare, and health insurance are our big 3. And those are not factored in to the current federal poverty level.
No, they're just the other 2/3. And
they're just the other, yeah, the other like 60%. And so that's really problematic, because actually food doesn't even come close to being a third of the budget. It's about 15% of the way that we have estimated it. And so we've actually looked at a different way of talking about poverty. But before we get into that, so the problem with measuring poverty in such a very restrictive way, looking at food being a third of your income and then multiplying by 3, is that it really underestimates how many people are struggling, not only in Texas but across the country. And as you said, because it doesn't take into account regional variation, the same poverty level, for example, a little over $17,000, $17,600 for a family of 3, counts as poverty whether you live in New York City, or whether you live in Brownsville, Texas, or whether you live in Wyoming. And so that really creates a real difficulty for families, where you can imagine someone living in Houston, a family living in Houston, and their expenses are going to be much higher, particularly for housing and childcare. That family who makes $18,000 is not going to get as far in Houston as they would maybe in the Valley, where prices are a little lower. But neither family is going to qualify for any assistance that uses a federal poverty measure as the cutoff point. And so that's really problematic. Politically, it's problematic, because to change that measurement in a way that more accurately reflects how many people are struggling is going to raise the number of people living in poverty at such a dramatic rate that nobody wants all of a sudden magically all these poor people to show up in my term.
That's right. No president is going to want to say,
right,
oh, the poverty rate just went up.
Right. It's political death. Yeah. And so no one wants to say, oh my gosh, now we have double the number of people who are living in poverty. So it's politically very sticky, though there is some conversation both regionally and nationally about the importance of changing that. And there has been a movement among many organizations to say, well, if poverty doesn't cut it, how do we measure it? And so at the Center for Public Policy Priorities, we came up with family budgets. We called it our family budget estimator, and we actually looked at regional variation. So we looked at 27 different metropolitan areas across Texas, and we estimated the cost of housing based on Section 8 housing rental costs. So we tried to use very conservative measures of housing, but things that would still estimate costs that would be represent safe housing, let's say. So we looked at the Thrifty Food Plan from the Agriculture Department based on family size. We looked at the cost of gas based on the IRS reimbursement rate. This is probably more detail than you wanted, but we tried to use very conservative measures and looked at the cost of health insurance as impacting this budget too. And what we found was, if you had to pay for health insurance out of pocket and you didn't get it from your employer, your family would need to make between 200 and 300% of poverty, so 2 to 3 times the poverty level, depending on where you were living, to even make ends meet. And we didn't add anything in for long-distance phone calls, for gifts that you would give your family at Christmas time, for school supplies, no eating out, I mean, and no savings.
No paying down debt.
No paying down debt repayment at all. And there was really no cushion for if you had a fender bender and you needed to get your car fixed. You know, we didn't factor that in, and still it came up.
Lose your job.
Right, right. So it still came up to over, between 2 and 3 times poverty. And so what we're trying to point out here is we really have got to have in place very strong work supports for families to be able to help them both weather crises and give them the opportunity to build their skills and build the opportunity for them to move into better paying jobs in the middle class. And without those kind of work supports, we can't possibly expect families to be able to advance themselves in this economy.